bacon. We're gonna bake up a sourdough loaf, and we are going to make a sawmill gravy to go with our pork chops using the drippings from it. We got a little bit of a stick on here. There we go, add it back on there. We'll flip this guy over onto our parchment paper. We're gonna score him up, and then we will pop him in my Dutch oven that I have been preheating in the oven at 500 for the last hour. So we're gonna make a nice long expansion score. There we go. And then just gonna do our simple wheat leaf design. And we'll pop them in here to start baking up. Nice and hot. This guy's pretty big. I don't know if I evenly divided my 2 loaves. This one looks a little bit bigger than my other one, but it'll bake up just fine. We're gonna pop this in the oven at 500 degrees. We're gonna bake for 20 minutes with the lid on at 500, and then 20 minutes with the lid off at 450.
You have a question? If they can't reach 500 in their oven, do you have any suggestions?
You can do 450. You just might have to increase the bake time in there for just a little bit longer for the second part on there, or even the first part. Let me set my timer for 20 minutes. You're just gonna have to kind of figure out what works for it. So you could do 450 and then maybe add 5 minutes on to each side to see if it gives you kind of that perfect cook. But there's a lot of different ways that you can bake the sourdough, so it doesn't have to be at 500. I just like 500 because it kind of makes this perfect steam environment in there. Okay, let's get our potatoes kind of peeled and ready to go. Then we'll work on our apples. We'll season up our pork chops. These are pretty thick pork chops, so we're gonna kind of sear them off in our pan, and then we'll finish them up in the oven. But I will use their drippings to make a delicious kind of gravy. And that's a really great way to finish cooking your pork chops in the oven, because it keeps them nice and juicy. A lot of times if you try to cook them all the way through on the stove, especially the thick cut ones, the meat will really dry out and get tough. Because pork is one of those tricky meats that if you get it done perfectly, it's wonderful, but overcooked, it is dry and tough. We're gonna use our russet potatoes to make our mashed potatoes, because that makes the best mashed potatoes. In my opinion, they're nice and fluffy, not super dense, because russets are just a lighter, kind of less starchy potato. I always find getting the bigger potatoes are a little bit easier to peel. So we'll get these off, and then I'm going to just dice them up smaller so that they'll kind of cook up pretty fast, especially since we're doing them on my smaller burner, because I've got a lot going on my stove today.
You have a question? Outside of russet, what's the next best potato to mash?
Well, if you like skins on your potato, a red potato I think is lovely with the skins on, because they're a little less waxy than a Yukon Gold. Now, Yukon Golds make good mashed potatoes, but it's a really sticky mashed potato. It's really thick, not as fluffy. So, russets are my favorite, but then I would go followed by like a red potato and then a Yukon Gold, kind of in there, because that that red potato is kind of like a mix in between. If you cut it open, it's gonna actually have like kind of like a whiter color similar to the russets, and its texture I feel like is in between, but it still has a really delicate skin on it, so you don't have to peel it in there. And same thing with the Yukon Golds, you don't have to peel. But when you use the really big ones, I kind of prefer peeling it because, again, their skins, you know, can get a little like long and stringy. Okay, let's get this last guy peeled up. And then we'll dice them and put them in our water and get those start to boil on there. I was kind of deciding what to do with, you know, kind of like our, I will say like our starch with the dinner tonight. Because we always kind of like to have like either a potato or a grain with dinner. And I know we're having bread, but like kind of like your base starch. And so, you know, we had rice at lunch today, and I didn't want to do pasta again. So mashed potatoes with pork chops just always go really well. We're going to kind of cube these up. With the russet potatoes, you do want to make sure that your potatoes are all kind of the same size, because I think what makes russet potatoes so nice and fluffy is that they don't hold their shape when you boil them, so that they get really fluffy instead of sticky. But if you overboil them, they will disintegrate to nothing. So making sure they're all about the same size is going to allow them to really cook up at the same time. Put that guy down a little. And we'll toss these in. And then, again, the best way to make mashed potatoes, in my opinion, is use cream, not milk, and butter. So just cream, butter, and salt, and just makes the best mashed potatoes. And I figured if you're eating mashed potatoes, you're not eating them because you're on a diet. You're eating them because they're delicious. So make them delicious. And then we'll make the sawmill gravy, which you can put on the mashed potatoes as well. But it's essentially, it's called a sawmill gravy because it almost looks like sawdust, in the sense of like if you added water to sawdust, it would make that, because it's made from the drippings in the pan, which gives it these little kind of like specks in it, but it's mainly like a milk base with it. So it's kind of like a bechamel sauce on there with the drippings. It's, I guess, a pretty southern thing. There. And then we got our potatoes all cut up. I'm gonna drop them in my water over there so they can start cooking up. Again, this will take a little bit longer than when I have it on my bigger burner because it is a smaller burner. But we've got the time with our sourdough baking up. And then I'm going to give these a good stir, and then I'm going to pour off the top of this starchy water, which is going to allow it to be, again, even more fluffy, just getting rid of that extra starch. So you'll see a little bit of this cloudiness on top. We're going to just kind of pour a little bit of that off. You could also blot it with a paper towel.
What's the best way for trying to make sure your potatoes are cut into similar size?
Just being careful when you're making like those cuts that you are trying to be as accurate as possible. I think with time you just kind of get it out, and you don't have to be like on the dot, everyone's the exact same size, just kind of in the ballpark. I'm gonna pick up again a little bit of that starch on top. That will give me a nice fluffier mashed potato. Okay, let's season up our pork chops, then we'll work on our apples on here. That way the pork chops can have a minute to kind of soak in the flavors, because we're not doing a super wet marinade on them, but a little bit of a kind of a drier one. We will use our Worcestershire, which is going to keep it nice and juicy.
Yeah, lots of comments, no braids today.
No braids. I had braids in for the majority of the day, but I took a late shower not too long ago, because it's one of those days that it's just so cold outside, and I just decided I needed a nice warm shower after coming back from soccer practice, and so into the ponytail, because I was letting it dry, but my hair gets really really big, so I had to pull it back somewhat, but it's not completely dry yet. And if I leave it up in my braids right now, that when I go to bed tonight, it will still be wet because it takes a while for my hair to dry. It's so funny. So growing up, I was always like, every time I went to the hairdresser, they would be like, oh, you have such thick hair, you have such thick hair. And I still have really thick hair. But my daughter has, my oldest daughter, she has even thicker hair than what I have. And her hair is so thick, and she has the same thing where her hair just takes forever to dry. And I'm just not that fancy to get a hair dryer out or anything like that. Okay, we put a little bit of onion powder, Worcestershire, garlic salt. We're gonna do some thyme. And we're gonna sprinkle this over. We're gonna do lots of great spices on here. These are really thick, so we kind of want them to really like pop through with the flavors. And we're gonna use a little bit of Mrs. Dash's Table Blend, which is kind of just a finely ground everything spice. It has like all of the good stuff in it: thyme, oregano, marjoram, savory, pepper, a little bit of everything. And then we're gonna use a little bit of Italian seasoning as well. And then we're gonna put a sprinkle of black pepper, and then we're gonna flip these over and do the exact same on the other side. Again, lots of it because I want some of these spices to get down on my pan as well and to kind of caramelize in the drippings so that I can make a lovely gravy out of it that will have a lot of flavor in it as well. Okay.
You have a question. Have you ever tried out for a cooking show?
I have not. And I don't know if I could, like, the commitment that you have to be away from your family is a big commitment. And I don't know if I'd want to do that right now, in the kids' kind of lives. It's already hard enough trying to figure out schedules with 5 kids. I don't know if I could just up and go for like 6 weeks. It would just be chaos and crazy, and I think I'd miss my kids too much. Or maybe my husband, but definitely the kids. But I mean, maybe when the kids are older or whatnot. I mean, I've thought about it, how it would be interesting. I think one of the biggest detractors for me is I am not like super big on presentation, you know, making it look all fancy and whatnot. I just like it to taste good. So it'd have to be like one of those home chefs, not one of those like fancy bougie chefs. And now, so we use garlic salt on one side. We're gonna use some Lowry seasoning salt on the other side. So kind of, we're getting the salty flavors, but kind of two different coming from. The seasoned salt has kind of a celery salt in it, where the other one is garlic. So you're getting a hit of both of them. It just makes it a little bit more savory. And it has a bit of paprika in it as well, which is why it has that nice orange color to it. And then we've got our table blend. So it's kind of almost going to be like a dry rub on there that will kind of soak in and flavor it up. But these again are thick chops. So you need a lot of flavor on them because you don't want to get to the middle part and just have that monotony of just a plain pork chop without the flavor, because we're not doing a super long marinade on these. These are just kind of like a quick dry rub that we'll sear off. Okay, I'll let those sit for a little bit, and let's go work on our apples over here. I'm going to give my hands a quick wrench. And we're going to have some spiced apples because I just feel like pork chops and apples go together, and kind of wanted them tonight, feeling that festive on there. If my pears had been ripe, I would have done a nice spiced pear. We're gonna have our apple cutting board when we cut apples. So we're using our Granny Smith apples on here. So I'm just gonna quarter them, and then I will core them and then do a quick kind of peel. I'll get 2 peeled up, pop them in there to start the cooking process, and then we'll kind of peel up the rest. We're gonna use a little bit of lemon juice, freshly squeezed lemon juice in there as well, just to kind of add a little tanginess to it, although Granny Smith, you don't need to add too much to it. You can also use apple cider for more of that apple kick to it.
You have a question. What's the best way to learn what pairs with what?
You know, you can always, I feel like you can always search it up and just be like, what goes well with like apples or what things. You could always go through that. But honestly, just exploring and tasting and trying and then just seeing how it fits. When you go to restaurants, see how like they've put things together, because you're pretty much not going to go to a restaurant where things are paired terribly, because then they wouldn't be successful. And so a lot of times I think if you're starting out cooking, try to recreate the meals that you like the most when you go out to eat. And that way, you know, you kind of know what those flavors are supposed to taste like versus a recipe you've never made before. And then you can kind of hone in on those skills. You kind of learn what flavors work well, you know, with it. And honestly, it's just through like tasting and practice and you know, and testing, and over the times you kind of learn what goes together. And I also feel like with everybody, there's a little bit of individuality, because if you don't like a certain spice or a certain fruit, then that kind of takes that whole kind of, you know, chunk out of the, you know, the game with your cooking. Now, the more you cook, I find that you kind of broaden your horizon. So I used to absolutely dislike mustard. Never, ever liked it as a kid, and I didn't really like it for most of my life. But it's kind of growing on me now, because I've been using it in a couple of marinades and a little different things, and I started to like it more. Okay, we've got our first two apple things. Now, I do not slice my apples this way because I find it's easier to slice them the short way, and it gives you this nice kind of even pieces of apple chunks that aren't super huge, that are more bite-sized, versus when you do them the long one, it's kind of too much to have in one mouth. And I do this for all of my baked goods. It's just a little bit easier that way and a little bit more uniform.
Oh, where'd you get the apple cutting board?
I've had this for a very, very, very long time. I got this in college because I always like to say in my dorm room I had like an illegal kitchen, because you weren't allowed to have like a hot plate or a toaster oven or any of that, and I had all of it in my dorm room. And I had these cute little plates, and they were a set, and I want to say they either came from Target or Walmart back in the early 2000s. But I had, don't have the eggplant one anymore, but I had an apple, an orange, an eggplant, and a lemon. So I still have 3 of them on there. But I love them because they're just fun and cute. Okay, we've got 2 of our apples in here, and I just like to start cooking them up. That way when we start to stir, then you've already got one base cooking. We're gonna add in a little bit of butter. This is gonna help make a little bit of a thicker sauce on it, so it's not super runny. I will add a little bit of cornstarch to thicken it up, so it has that nice like sticky sauce to it. Now you could always keep cooking it until all the liquid kind of has evaporated and you've made more of a little caramel sauce on there. But cornstarch gets you there. So we're gonna add in about a half a tablespoon of butter. You don't need a whole lot to get you to that place. I'm gonna just turn on my back burner. And I'm gonna do it in a Dutch oven, which is going to allow that heat to come a little bit more evenly to it, so it doesn't get too hot and kind of turn the sugar into caramel. And then we're gonna use brown sugar. Since we've got 4 apples, I'm gonna use about a cup, a loosely packed cup of brown sugar. Kind of think about 1/4 a cup per apple when you're using Granny Smiths. Sweeter apples, you can use less sugar. So Pink Ladies, I would use about 3/4 of a cup on there, and if you go even sweeter, then you would use less. Apples to avoid when cooking with are like the Golden Delicious and the Red Delicious. They are very, very mealy, and they'll get mushy instead of hold their form. So while Granny Smiths are really tart, they do hold their form when they're cooking. Where's my cinnamon and my vanilla? We're gonna put about a teaspoon of cinnamon. So I think about 1/4 a teaspoon per apple. So we'll have some more apples coming in here in just a second. And again, I'm just going to eyeball it with cinnamon. It's okay if you go a little over, a little under. It's not gonna make too much of a difference. And then about 1/2 a teaspoon of vanilla. It really mellows out the flavors and works really well, which I find is about a capful. And then we don't need a lot of lemon juice in here. So I'm actually gonna cut this off and save these because my 10-year-old daughter and my 4-year-old son love to eat lemons. So they'll have 3/4 of a lemon to eat, but just about 1/4 of a lemon. Sweeter apples, you'll want a little bit more of the lemon juice in it. It's gonna help prevent, the apples from going, brown. Kind of preserves them if you don't eat them all the first day, but these will be gone tonight because these are our favorite. And then let me grab a little spoon and we're gonna give this a quick toss, kind of coat it up, and then we'll finish peeling up the rest of the apples to kind of toss them there. You don't need to add any more liquids. Did I completely miss the whole apple chunk? That would be me. Must have buried it. We'll just chop it up real quick. Don't add any more liquid because these apples will, once they hit that heat, they will start letting out their natural juices. And you don't want too much liquid in there or it's gonna be really soupy. Now, if you're gonna do pears instead of apples, you're gonna wanna make sure your pears have a little bit of a soft touch to them because you don't want them rock hard or they won't be very sweet. And you can use a lot less sugar because pears are a lot sweeter. Let's go grab our sourdough out. We're gonna take the lid off and we'll reduce our temperature down to 450 and bake for 20 minutes with the lid off. Grab a trivet right here. And we're gonna have to grab the lobster and the cat because I don't have normal oven mitts. Why have normal oven mitts when you can have fun ones? Okay, we've got our lid coming off and look at our gorgeous little peak. You can kind of see our wheat leaf and our pink there. You can also see our blondies have almost been completely eaten from the lunch stream. Everybody was very, very excited about them. Slide that in there. We're gonna bring our temperature down to 450 from 500. And I just find the easiest way is just to completely cancel off your oven. And then we're gonna set our timer for 20 minutes. And that's gonna give you a very a light brown, a kind of a golden brown, or I like to say a blonde bake, which is gonna give you a chewier crust, not a super crunchy crust. And I like that because if you cook it too long, the next day when you're eating your sourdough, that crust will get rock hard. And then my kids always say, it's too hard. And then they only eat the middle and not the crust. So cook it a little under, and that way for the next day or two when you're eating it, it will be perfect, especially if you're gonna turn it into grilled cheese sandwiches or toast it up on there. It's just a little bit nicer. And you won't over bake the bottom of your sourdough. Okay, let's get these last two peeled up, sliced and in there. And we're gonna start cooking off our pork chops, working on our Brussels sprouts and bacon. And there, you know what? I'm gonna take a quick pause between peeling this. That way I can actually get my pan warming up here for our pork chops.
Do you have a plan for Christmas dinner yet?
Yes, so I actually kind of make the exact same meals every single year for Christmas Eve and Christmas dinner. So on Christmas Eve, we do the prime rib roast. So we get a nice big rack right there. And then I serve that with mashed potatoes and gravy, Brussels sprouts and bacon. We're having part of it tonight. Caramelized carrots and onions, and I'll make either homemade rolls or homemade bread. And then we'll have all of our like dessert cookies from like our Christmas cookie extravaganza, from everything like that. So that is what we kind of do for Christmas Eve. And then on Christmas, we do our Swedish smorgasbord or Yule board, which is the Christmas feast, which is kind of this multi-course feast that starts out with like cheeses and cold meats and deviled eggs and pickled herring done several different ways, a shrimp cocktail, and then it moves on to like the warmer dishes. We'll make Janssen's Temptation, which is this potato dish that has a secret ingredient in it. You'll just have to tune in to find out what this secret ingredient is. And I'll make my Swedish meatballs. We'll do a Christmas ham. Traditional Swedish ham is not like an American ham, but it's really hard to find here. So I just do an American ham instead, which I like a little bit more because I find like a Swedish ham kind of tastes like a pork chop or a pork tenderloin because it's not cured as long. And then you do the Christmas pudding, which you got to leave out for the tomtens. And then, of course, all of the dessert, which will have our pepparkaka on it, which is our Swedish gingerbread cookies, which are more like a spice cookie than a gingerbread cookie. So that's kind of what we do on Christmas. And there's specific rules in how you eat the feast, and you can't take certain courses out of meals. Now, growing up, like my grandfather, who I called Muffa, which means mother's father in Swedish, he was a very big stickler about it, so you had to follow it exactly. He did not want you to deviate from how it was done. He was a traditionalist on there. But lots of little delicious things that we'll have. A lot of cooking goes into it. So growing up, it was one of those things. Let me pop these pork chops in. We never ever were allowed to open up presents until the Christmas feast was cleaned up. So, and we have changed it since we got married, so we don't follow it. But I never got to open up presents until like 10 o'clock at night on Christmas. So you got your stockings in the morning, and then you had to wait all day and all night until you could open it up. And can you imagine having, the way my mom did it as well, is you had to be opened one present at a time through the siblings. So when we celebrated, I just celebrated it with my full like biological siblings. So there was 7 of us, and I was the youngest. Can you imagine the torture that was? As a kid, I do not do that. We follow my husband's tradition, which is you do your stockings in the morning, and then we have like our little Christmas brunch breakfast thing, and then the kids open up presents. So there's no torture of waiting till the end of the day to get your presents. But that was it, because all of my parents, and I get the logic now. They didn't want to open up presents until they were done with all of their chores for the evening. But it's a long time to wait for a kid. Okay, we're going to coat up our spiced apples here. You can see that brown sugar and the butter and the cinnamon and vanilla, and a squeeze of fresh lemon juice. Coat it up and push it down. We'll let those cook. I'm going to turn this back one down to about a medium now. I'm going to rotate my pan here. We're going to sear off our pork chops, and then we will let them kind of flip over, and then we'll finish them off in the oven, but we want to make sure they get a good sear on them. Let's get our bacon going. For our Brussels sprouts and bacon, we'll start prepping the Brussels sprouts next. Now, we don't need a full pound of bacon in our Brussels sprouts. Just about a half a pound will do, especially since we're just making it for our 7 tonight. Kitchen shears are gonna be the best way to just snip up your bacon into your pan. It just cuts through it just so nicely. Much easier than trying to do it on a cutting board, and then you'll just use tongs to break it apart. Once you've got a good kind of semi-crisp up on the bacon, we'll put in our Brussels sprouts, which don't need too long to cook once they're in there. But this is one of the few vegetables that my husband really likes. And I think it's the bacon. Because you get a bite of bacon in every one. Okay. Get these guys flipped over. Beautiful. We've got our nice spices. Look at that gorgeous sear on them. Excellent. And again, a lot of those spices are going to stick to the bottom of the pan, but they're going to be incorporated into our gravy, which will add a lot of great flavor. So we'll sear it off. We're not going to cook these all the way through. We'll finish them off in the oven. It would take way too long to cook them over here, and they would get really, really dry if you did. We'll get our bacon going. Let's pull out a potato and see how it is. Now, the best way to check your potatoes to see if they're ready is you want to go in here and find a really big one, the biggest one you can see right up. If your fork can go through it easily like that, then they are ready to mash. If your fork does not go through it, then it needs to boil longer. If you've ever had the problem of lumps in your mashed potato, that's because you didn't cook all of your potatoes all the way through, so you had some bigger ones that still had chunks in it. And let me sear this. Grab that real quick. And then we're gonna strain our potatoes, and we're gonna put them right back in here because this is an all metal pan, which means I'm gonna put my oven mitt on because this is heavy. There we go. I can whip my mashed potatoes in this pan and it'll keep it nice and warm. Shake. Now don't accidentally forget about your potatoes because russets will completely disintegrate. They'll fall, they'll turn to complete mush in your pan. We're gonna add in, there's my butter. So we can just add the rest of this. We're gonna add in our butter in here. We're not gonna whip it until our butter is melted and our cream is nice and warm. So we're gonna put in about a 1/4 cup of heavy cream. And I'll probably add in more later, but we start with a little and we add some more so we don't have too much. So I'm gonna turn my apples down a little bit lower. We can see we're starting to get a lot of them to get nice and translucent. So they'll have those nice flavors on it. You've got a couple coming here. Just gotta put them under and tuck it. And now I'm gonna grab a baking sheet, and we're going to transfer our pork chops to the baking sheet. And that way they'll finish off in the oven on here. And again, you're going to have some of our spices stuck onto the bottom of our pan, but that is going to give you really great and delicious stuff for the gravy. Our pork chops are still raw in the middle. We're gonna finish them off in the oven, so we'll pop them in there. And since we have, about 9 minutes left, we'll pop them in there at 450 underneath our Dutch oven. You don't want it to be on direct heat, but underneath it. You could bring your oven down to 400 as well. But being underneath the Dutch oven will allow it to get a little bit less direct heat. And that will finish cooking up. It will have the nice sear on it, but it will be a perfect juicy center to it. And that just allows it to get, again, nice and delicious. Okay. Let me grab our butter to make our roux with our spices. There it is. For our gravy. And I'm going to use about 2 tablespoons of butter. I'm gonna let it melt in the residual heat from the pan. And then once it's melted, I'll start scraping off those spots, but then we'll add in some flour. But while we're waiting, let me first toss this bacon, then we're gonna chop up our Brussels sprouts.
Hey, question. Do you like bone-in pork chops?
I love bone-in pork chops. I also love thick-cut boneless pork chops. For the kids, it's a little bit easier for them to eat the boneless because they're not trying to cut around the bone. But that meat is most tender right next to that bone, which I do love it. It just depends on if they're good. Sometimes you go to the grocery store and the bone-in ones are really thin, and I'm not a big thin pork chop person, unless I'm gonna make them into like fried pork tenderloin sandwiches. I like the thick chop because that's gonna give you the juiciest kind of cook up on it. So it's just really what's available. I've cooked bone-in several times, and those are also really great to finish off in the oven because that bone is a really good conductor of heat, so it keeps it nice and really juicy and delicious. Okay, we're gonna quarter our Brussels sprouts. We're just gonna kind of cut off that little nub on the bottom, and then I quarter it, which just allows the leaves to kind of fall apart when you're cooking, so you don't have to go through the process of shredding it. But it allows you to toast up that middle part of the Brussels sprout, which is the most bitter. If you've ever had Brussels sprouts and you feel like they taste really bitter, or they have a really kind of that cabbagey crustacean, I can't even say the word. It's a word that you call Brussels sprouts and cauliflower and kale and cabbage. Starts with a C. I'm blanking on it right now, but it's that flavor. You just want to cook it. I find when you steam Brussels sprouts, you have that flavor. It's really strong. So when I quarter it, I get rid of that really strong flavor because I'm actually getting some direct heat on that middle part where you have a lot more of that sulfury, bitter flavor. And if you've never seen how Brussels sprouts grow, they're actually really cool. When we used to get our groceries, we used to get like a kind of a CSA, a crop share box from the farmer's market. And sometimes we would get the Brussels sprouts on the big stalk, which is just a bunch of balls around this like big stalk. And it's much nicer when they're already cut off than when you have to cut them off yourself. But it's kind of really cool. It's like one of those things where like, who thought to eat that plant? I always wonder that with a lot of things. Who thought to try this? You know, it's like cinnamon. Who thought to eat the bark of a tree? But I'm glad they did, because cinnamon's delicious. Okay. Again, pop these on. Unfortunately, there's no really great way to cut up Brussels sprouts. It's one of my least favorite things to do, like a kitchen prep-wise. Okay. Our bacon's almost there. Our butter is looking good. We'll turn on the heat in just a second. But again, right now we have it off, but it's melted. And when we add our flour in, we'll turn it on low to make the base, the roux, to our gravy, which is what will thicken it up. And for a sawmill, we're gonna add in milk as the base, which is gonna give it that kind of white color to it with the little tasty bits. It kind of makes it look like sawdust mixed with water or milk. But it's a really good kind of creamy gravy that goes well with pork chops or fried chicken fried steak. And I'm like thinking about all these delicious things I want. And this is why I can never plan meals out, because I always plan what I want to eat every night. You know, I'm sitting there, am I going to work on it? But I was deciding between steelhead trout and pork chops tonight, but it just felt so cold. It's like 30 degrees here that we needed a nice warm and homey dish versus trout. Which if you've never had steelhead trout, it looks like salmon and tastes similar to salmon. Just not quite as fishy. Okay, I think we should be good on our Brussels sprouts here. So we're gonna top these in and let them start cooking in the bacon grease. Again, you want your bacon to be just around crispy, but not all the way, because you don't want them to be crunchy in your Brussels sprouts and bacon, but more of a crispy, chewy. I'm gonna coat them up in that bacon grease, which is gonna give those Brussels sprouts such a great flavor. And we're just gonna cook it over a low, kind of a medium low heat, around a 4, to allow them to crisp up and get that flavor. And then we will add a little bit of garlic salt at the end. We got it toasted, and then I'm gonna add in just a smidge of butter, because you just never know exactly how much fat you're gonna need in here. Sometimes you get bacon that has a lot of fat in it, and sometimes you don't. But if your pan looks a little dry, you just need to add a little bit in so you don't end up burning your bacon or your Brussels sprouts. Okay, we'll whip up our mashed potatoes in just a second. Our apples are looking pretty darn good. They're almost all translucent now. We've got a few just on top. We'll mix them under. And then we'll add in a little bit of cornstarch to thicken this sauce up so it kind of clings to the apple, so every bite has that nice flavor in it instead of just falling right off. Okay, let's get our roux going. Actually, let's whip up our mashed potatoes first, because our gravy will take us like 2 minutes to make. And I always like to make gravy towards the very end, because if you make it too soon, when you turn it off the heat, it will congeal because of that fat in it. So you don't want it to get you don't want to have to wait too long. This is an all-metal pan, so you can whip your mashed potatoes right in here. Don't do it if you have a non-stick pan, or you'll ruin it. Our butter is all melted up. You can still see how hot it is. That's the nice thing about keeping it in the pan that you boiled them in. Keeps it nice and hot. Okay. We're gonna add a little bit more cream and then our salt. Whip that up. And turn it nice and high. And then we're going to let it sit for just a few minutes, and then we'll whip it one last time to kind of get those flavors in. Get our Brussels sprouts, kind of. You can see we're starting to get some nice kind of brown edges on them right there. Looking delicious. You'll know your Brussels sprouts are ready when they kind of lose a little bit of that bright white color and they get more of a vibrant green. I'm going to pop a lid on them so that they can start to steam up a little bit, but still remain crispy. Here. I'm gonna slide this over here so we can bring our Dutch oven. Get the butter out, and then we'll pull this out. We'll make up our gravy. We'll add a little bit of cornstarch in to our apples, and we'll be fine. Let's start up here. Okay, so we baked. We're gonna take both our pork chops out and our meat out here. So let's get our bread first, and then we'll come back for our pork chops. Look at our beautiful, gorgeous bread. Nice kind of blonde bake on it, which is just perfect. And then when you do this, you want to make sure you take it out of your Dutch oven right away. So we're going to slide it right here. And then we're going to bring this back over here so we can grab our meat out, and I can put it on that one. So let me grab another. Here are our gorgeous pork chops that are nice. And then what I like to do, once you take your pork chops out of the oven, to keep them nice and juicy, is you want to take and flip them over because they've been baking with that top side up. So you flip them over, look, they've got this nice kind of golden color from where their juices are, but it's going to allow all the juices that have settled to the bottom to fall back down into the pork chop and kind of hydrate the top edge of it. So it just makes it so much juicier. Here we go. Beautiful. And now here's our gorgeous sourdough loaf. Nice, beautiful kind of golden brown coloring on it. Again, that's just baking it for 20 minutes with the lid off. Nice light brown color on the bottom. Our beautiful score. And we have our lovely peak there from our expansion on there. So just perfect. Which you gotta let about 10 minutes before you can cut into it so that it doesn't get gummy. Look, our Brussels sprouts now have this nice bright green color to it, which lets me know that they're getting to that nice kind of tender crisp without getting mushy. So we're gonna take the lid off. I'm gonna sprinkle a little bit of garlic salt over them, and we're gonna let that garlic salt kind of hydrate. Before we mix it in. And then let's work on our roux here. So I'm going to turn my stove on to nice and low. Grab a whisk. Let's see, which one do I want to use? I got this new one when I was at IKEA, so I haven't used it yet, but I'll see how I like it. I'm very particular about whisks, but you can't use metal whisks in nonstick pans because they can get ruined. We're going to put in about 2 tablespoons of flour in here with our kind of 2 tablespoons of butter. And we're going to mix this up, kind of incorporate it. And you want to make sure you kind of scrape off any of those delicious, tasty bits on the bottom. I think I'm going to add a smidge more. There was a little bit of those residual drippings from the meat, so you just want to make sure you have a little bit of a paste form because you don't want it to be too greasy or you'll have kind of a split sauce. Okay. We're going to let the roux heat for just a second or two. Really let those flavors come out. I whip my mashed potatoes one last time. Get it up nice and high. Beautiful. And I always say, do a couple of whippings over a couple of seconds so that the butter and the cream can fully hydrate into the potatoes. It's going to give you the best one. Get that ready. Let me grab my milk out of the fridge for this. And then we're going to add a splash of chicken bouillon just to add a little bit of saltiness and flavor, but you don't need too much. Give this a quick toss. Beautiful. You can see our Brussels sprouts are getting these just perfect kind of crispy edges on here, just like that. That way they just have this great flavor in them, little crispiness to it that's just lovely. Okay, we're going to add a little, about a teaspoon of chicken bouillon. For this, it's going to add a little bit of richness to the sauce and a little bit of saltiness. And then we're going to use our milk. I'm going to use whole milk because I think it's going to give the best flavor to it. And you're going to add just a little at a time because you don't want to kind of put too much in and seize it. But you see how you have these little bits? And it's called sawmill gravy because it looks like sawdust mixed in here. But it has all of those flavors from the drippings in it. And it is just delicious. We'll let that thicken up and heat up, and then we'll add a little bit more as we go. Again, just making sure you're scraping those tasty little bits off because they're going to add so much flavor, and that will really work well with the thing. Okay, our apples are pretty much nice and tender. So in order to get that sauce to really cling to the apples, we're gonna add in just a little bit of cornstarch, about a tablespoon or so. We'll start by adding about a tablespoon, mix it in and add a little bit more. You don't wanna go too much or it will get, it could get too thick.
You have a question? Do you like your new whisk?
I do. It actually, it's really big, but it does hold its shape and form fairly well. It works well for the big frying pans. That wouldn't work as well for a little one, but it works well in here. You know what? I think a half a tablespoon is going to do just fine with the apples. You see how it's already instantly thickened up? And this will be absolutely delicious. So I'm going to turn my apples down, the heat off, so you just kind of have that residual heat on there. And then let's get our whisk. Here you go, you can see it's starting to thicken up now. So we're gonna add a little bit more. And again, you're just gonna have to add liquid until you get to the kind of the consistency that it is, knowing that it is going to thicken up with heat. So if you leave the heat on, it will evaporate the liquid and it will thicken up. Let me grab a spoon and we can taste the flavor and see if we are ready to serve up our dinner. Just perfect. Just heat it up just a little bit and add a smidge more cream because once I heat it up a little bit higher, it will thicken up a little bit more. Now you can use, if you're gonna use, like if you don't have whole milk, you could always use like 2% or skim and just add a splash of cream or half and half in there just to give it a little bit of that richer kind of texture to it and a little bit of that flavor. But I feel like I have little ones around, so we always have whole milk. And whole milk is, I find, just nicer in baking in general. Okay, add a last little splash in here, and we've got our kind of our sawmill gravy with all of those tasty herbs and spices and bits from our pork chop. Spiced apples, mashed potatoes, Brussels sprouts and bacon, and then of course our pork chops. And again with pork chops, you'll take them out of the oven. You need to let them set for a few minutes before you cut into them, because just like with all hot meat, if you cut into it too soon, the juices will come out and then you'll have a nice dry pork chop. There we go. Beautiful. Okay, I think we are ready to serve up dinner here. Let me see if I can maneuver things around so I can plate. Off, and off. I'm going to slide this guy over here so that it's a little bit closer. And then let me grab a ladle for our gravy, and then we'll be ready to serve up. Since it's a silicone, and that will give me a little bit of a base. Okay. And we'll spray this here. For dinner tonight, we have our pan-seared pork chops that we finished off in the oven since they're nice and thick. We're gonna serve that with our creamy mashed potatoes and a good helping of Brussels sprouts with bacon. Fry up the bacon first, and then when you crisp that bacon up, or the Brussels sprouts and the bacon, you just get so much delicious flavor. We have our spiced apples that our Granny Smith spiced with cinnamon, vanilla, a dash of lemon juice and brown sugar. And then of course, we will top our pork chop off and our mashed potatoes with our sawmill gravy, which is made from the drippings of our pork chops, milk, from a lovely roux that just has this wonderful flavor over it. And then, of course, we will serve it up with a slice of our homemade sourdough bread, which will be just fantastic. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page, so if you ever want to recreate any of our recipes at home, you can just go to our page and search for what we made. We've got our pork chops, our Brussels sprout and bacon, spiced apples with our sawmill gravy, and you can always watch and cook along with us again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets. I've got my hex-clad pan in there, my Dutch oven, my Le Creuset, my knives, my bakeware, all the different things I use in the kitchen I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.